Welcome, listeners, to a realm where shadows dance and whispers echo. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and this is Quills and Chills, the podcast that brings you face to face with the masterminds behind the macabre. In each episode, we journey into the minds of horror writers and filmmakers to uncover the secrets lurking within their tales of terror. From classic tales to modern nightmares, we'll traverse the corridors of the human psyche and unravel the threads of dread that keep us turning the pages or sitting out there in the dark. Welcome to Quills and Chills. Welcome back to Quills and Chills. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and today I am joined by Jeff Vande Zande, or as I'm going to refer to him in this interview, Van the Man. And he is the author of the book The Dance of Rotten Sticks, and this tale weaves a supernatural intrigue with deeply human struggles. It creates a story that's as eerie as it is emotionally resonant. And we're going to dive into all the inspirations behind this book, as well as the challenges of blending together all of these different elements. So welcome to the show, Van.
Oh, thanks for having me. Hello to everyone.
So before we get started, I always like to sort of get to know a little bit about you. So I'm going to start with the hardest question you'll have to answer today. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Right. Well, I am a community college professor here in Michigan at a college called Delta College. I teach English, but tangentially, I also teach in our film program. So I teach cinematography and screenwriting and creative writing. Always have lived in Michigan, was originally born in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which, for some has a little bit of a mystique to it. They think we're all riding around with sled dogs up there, but there's modern conveniences and everything. But yeah, that's kind of me. And I have a couple of children. They're adult children now, but I think raising them played a part in the book. That's me in a nutshell.
I thought I saw a four-legged friend running around there somewhere too. So did I
Oh
see
yeah,
that?
he's since shifted over a little bit. He's sleeping on his little blanket here. It's a little chilly here in Michigan, so the dogs tend to stick close. And there's a couple of larger dogs in kennels downstairs because they definitely would have disturbed us. They're camera hogs. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, let's talk about a little bit about your writing before we dive into the story. I'd love to know your process. Like, are you someone that do you just dive in with both feet? Are you like an obsessive planner, or are you a little bit of both? What's your process like?
I think anybody who says, they're a pantser and they just fly by the seat of their pants, I don't think that's entirely true. And I don't think there's anything true to somebody who's like a strict plotter. I mean, I think the plotter has to be open to the serendipitous moment where they discover something that was not in their notes, but it makes sense in the heat of the writing. And I would not consider myself a plotter, but I know, like, when I'm driving, when I go for a run, I'm turning over possible ideas. And I did even today when I was at the gym, I had an idea and I, quickly got out my phone. Thank God for notes on phone and jotted it down. But I don't do major plotting. I think coming from my screenwriting background, I hit some of the, I have some of the major moments that I know need to happen, to hold. I think of plot points as kind of like a spine. You need that to hold the body up, and in the same way, a story needs those major plot points to hold it up and make it work. So I often have those figured out. I have a vague idea of how it's going to end, but I don't want to know too much because I make a lot of discoveries along the way. I'm currently working on the sequel to The Dance of Rotten Sticks. I'm about 150 pages into that. And my process has been I finish a chapter and then I do go back and I read and make changes to that chapter. Not major, but I kind of have to feel good about a chapter before I can proceed to the next. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it can't be leaving holes or something. I'm not a I'll deal with that later person. Like, if I know there's something like this is glitchy, this is going to be problematic, I will rework a chapter until it's doing what I need it to do.
You and I are very much the same way in that regard. I can't seem to move on until I feel like I've gotten this section of something kind of where I feel like it needs to be and it's strong. It doesn't mean it's not going to change later, but for the most part, if something feels shaky, I've
Right.
got to go back and
Absolutely.
fix it. So
And I envy the people who can just leave a bracketed note that says figure this out and they can carry on. I think some people do need to just get that draft out there quickly. Myself too, I don't feel of the two, I enjoy rewriting much more than I enjoy writing, if that makes sense. The generative writing where I just have to sit down and watch myself write disappointing sentences that I know later I can go back and fix. I don't like the generative. There's a lot of mystery to it. I'm working on this sequel right now and I just hit 45,000 words, and knowing how much I have left, I finally hit that thank God moment. It's actually going to be a novel, like 5,000 more words and I'm in loose novel territory. And I know it's going to take more than $5,000 in words to finish it. So that feels good to know, like, okay, it's going to be a novel, because you also don't know that going in. Things can kind of crap out on you at 32,000 words. And it's like, oh, either I got to go in and put in a bunch of filler, or I just wrote a novella. And man, it's hard enough to market a novel in America. Call something a novella, and a lot of, oh, that sounds French. I don't want anything to do with that.
exactly. So I have a love hate with generative writing. I have especially free, like the biggest thing I think in college for me that I ever learned to accept was to freestyle write and not worry about structure, not worry about grammar, not worry about punctuation, just freestyle write, just get it out. And it was a very difficult thing for me to wrap my brain around. But once I did find it a little freeing in some regards. So
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
all right, well, let's talk about this book, shall we? Because I got to tell you, I just want to say, when I finished this book and when I put it down, I thought, wow, this is my kind of story. It hit every single element in this book that I was hoping it would hit. And I'm very big on. I've said this a million times on the show. I don't read the blurbs. I don't read the summaries or any of that stuff when I decide I want to sort of do a book. I want to be surprised by everything that's going to happen in the story, and I would say you did that. You accomplished that, and I just loved all the way the story came together. So let's talk a little bit about it, shall we? Why don't we
Okay.
start with tell us what the book itself is about.
Well, the book itself follows a widower, Isaac Fletcher, who at the beginning of the book, he loses his wife to kind of a bizarre car accident. He is left with these three children to raise, and the way they've kind of lived their lives, that's very new to him. His wife was very much involved with the child rearing while he was working for the US Fish and Wildlife Service, going to different rivers around the state of Michigan and working with the lamprey abatement. Not all of your listeners will know what sea lamprey are. All I all I would say is go Google them. That's one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen as a sea lamprey, and they're out in the Great Lakes. They're an invasive species. They if unchecked, they would wreak havoc on one of Michigan's core industries, the fishing industry, both recreational and commercial. So there are these teams for fish and wildlife who go to the rivers where lamprey spawn, and they treat the rivers and kill the lamprey larvae so the larvae don't turn around and get back in. Long story to why Isaac was not involved with the children as much as your typical father might be. So he's left struggling raising these kids. In his grief, he kind of descends into alcoholism, which was, he probably always had the potential to be an alcoholic, but this situation definitely pushed him farther. So his mother-in-law is even kind of hinting she would like to take the kids away from him. And he gets this idea. Now, whether or not it was his idea or an idea planted in his head by a nefarious force, he gets this idea that I'll take the kids to this cabin that my wife and I purchased just before she passed away. I'll take the kids there. It's on an island. It's going to get them off their screens. We're going to get closer as a family. It's for Emily's birthday. It's something unique for my soon-to-be 11-year-old's birthday. And unbeknownst to him, he's kind of bringing his children into the lion's den in that there are some occult and paranormal forces kind of not only waiting for them, but definitely played a part in their arrival.
What I love about this story and what struck me the most is the way you sort of dive into exploring grief. And it really raises some very interesting, profound questions, at least for me, in regards to a single father or a single parent, in whatever case the case may be, being left to raise, suddenly left, finding themselves in a, I'm not struggling with the words this morning, sorry, but they're struggling to find sort of their feet, and they're alone and raising. He's got 3 kids now that he's got to raise, and sort of figuring that out, and turning to alcohol as a way to cope with all of that. I just found this so profound, and I wonder if we could talk a little bit about some of the characters and the characterizations, and how you sort of approach exploring that grief, and what it was like crafting this character who, in my opinion, felt so very raw and very authentic to me in a way.
Hit me with wrapping that up with a question in terms of what do you want me to talk about? Like,
let's talk about the characters. Let's talk about Isaac to begin with, and sort of what the process was for creating Isaac and the way he deals with the grief in his life.
Yeah, I think I was dealing with grief in my life in terms of, while I was, writing it, the kind of forces that would end up being my second divorce were in play, but probably in a stage where I was somewhat ignoring that. I, like Isaac, had a drinking problem. Yeah, I would say no other way to say it than that I'm an alcoholic. But this April, 4 years sober, the book actually got me to quit. If I think writing Isaac, I was writing myself and his issues with thinking of what kind of father am I. I really think that was the impetus for writing this novel, and why it's a horror novel, and why we call alcohol one of these demons that we have to overcome. We give it a horrific name, because if alcohol has its claws in you in life, it does make everything difficult. Like Isaac, I kind of had these patterns that would kind of fool me into believing I had control over my drinking. His idea that if he just bought a pint of booze, that's mine. I mean, that was what I did. I would leave for the liquor store at 6 o'clock, because I don't have a problem with alcohol because I don't drink until the evening. All these things that I would tell myself, but I drank a pint of whiskey every night, chased it with beer. And yeah, Isaac, I never worked for Fish and Wildlife. I do fly fish quite a bit, but he's really based on me. And I think me dealing with questions of what kind of father am I? I might be a functional alcoholic, but there's no way this is not having an effect on my relationships with everyone, but especially my children. I would say Carson is based on a very young version of my son. I spent last night with my son playing Tony Hawk skating on an old PlayStation 2. We had a blast. He just had a child, so I'm a grandfather now. So watching my son with his kid is reminding me of what it was like to be, a young man with a baby. So, and then probably Ashley and Emily are an amalgam of my daughter. I did work 3 kids into the novel where I only had 2. So that would be an explanation, I think, of the main characters, of kind of where they came from. But that, I've been asked that a lot. Where did the idea come from to write the book? And I think it came out of my subconscious of it was me finally saying to myself, are you gonna be like your own old man? Are you gonna, my dad died from esophageal cancer, and the doctor, he smoked too, and the doctor told my mom it wasn't the smoking so much, Elaine. It was the fact that he wore down the lining of his esophagus by drinking brandy every night for 40 years. And I was on my way to becoming him. I was in bad health. I was smoking. So I think it was my subconscious finally saying, like, you got to take a real look at yourself. And maybe the only way to do that is write yourself into this fictional character.
Well, I loved it. I loved how you sort of intertwined all of these different sort of personal elements into the story, and I thought it came together, like I said, really wonderfully and in such a sort of raw and authentic way for me. So I a lot. I just really resonated a lot with his character and his personal journey through all of that.
I
Um,
think I think some of the character development, this is what readers have kind of come back to me with, and I'm reading it a little bit in reviews, is the character development that they really feel that they know these characters. And this is, I'm new to horror, but I'm not new to novel writing. I have 5 literary novels that I wrote and published with small presses, and I think that's where I honed my skills to develop characters. Because really, that's what literary writing is primarily all about, is developing characters in great depth.
It's interesting you say that. The characterization is very important, even in horror. I realize that horror sort of comes with its own stigma in a sense, but I love it because I've said it 100 times on the show. It's like holding up a mirror to society in a lot of ways. But I also liken it to like The Walking Dead, the TV show The Walking Dead. What I loved about The Walking Dead is that you are seeing how people are responding to all of these outside events, but the story itself is really about the people and the characters and sort of their, what's happening to them and how they're responding to things. And to me, that's the most fascinating part of any story, really, honestly. So
Yeah, I think if for horror writers, we're not only interested in the things that are happening, we're interested in the people that they're happening to. And if we're not connected to those people, it really strips your work of some of the horrificness, because we care. It's like, oh no, not Emily, or not, that kind of thing. We've come to love these characters.
for sure. I want to talk about the setting a little bit. I know it takes place on an island, and it just created this sense of like I knew the moment that they arrived there, I was like, oh, everything's gonna go to hell now at this point because here they are in this location, and I'll let you sort of talk about it. I don't want to give spoilers away, anything you don't want to spoil or whatever, but I would love to have you sort of talk about how this isolated landscape, what that was like bringing it to life, and how it made such a perfect backdrop for this story.
Well, I think there were a couple things in play. I was thinking, and this again is something that your listeners might like to look up, but in Michigan's history is not super exciting. But there is a little footnote in Michigan's history of a guy named King Strang, and he was a Mormon, and he kind of broke with the Mormon church, and he came to Beaver Island in Lake Michigan, and he formed his own kind of kingdom on this island, where he's an interesting character because for a while he was like an accepted politician. He was within the House of Representatives in Michigan in the 1800s, but then he, I don't know, megalomaniac or something, he got high on power and he created his own kind of little city on Beaver Island. So I think reading about him, and he's got kind of a Rasputin quality. There were some attempts on his life, and even though it should have killed him, it didn't. And I always found that, interesting about Rasputin too. That I fully believe that Rasputin had some powers, had some kind of, call it magic, call it what you will. And I think Strang may have too. So I think reading about King Strang was in my head. And then I wrote The Dance of Rotten Sticks in 2020. I'm trying to remember too. There was something kind of horrific going on in 2020. Started with the C. Not everybody heard about it, but no, with the COVID.
Maybe a little something, something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the pandemic is going on. I can't get out very much, but my buddy has a Airbnb up near Traverse City in Michigan, and it's on a lake called Island Lake. And there is this island in the middle of the lake, and there is a property out there. And he and I got to talking about like kind of like the hassles of that. Like, what if you forget something? Like you got to like get in your boat and go back to the landing. But I think it got me thinking about that too. And as somebody who I don't care to deal with technology when I'm writing, but if you don't have it in your work, it's going to seem like it's not contemporary if you don't deal with all the Facebook and Twitter and all the different things that people do on their phones, etc. So another boon to me was let's get rid of the Wi-Fi connection. Let's isolate them somewhere. And it plays into Isaac's whole goal anyways, is let's bring I need to be with my kids in a natural setting where we can get away from our distractions. Even though he brought a full box of all of his distractions with him. He has a whole big bottle of booze, or a big box of booze, but the kids don't have internet. And yeah, because sometimes if you read older books, sometimes you think, God, if they just had a phone,
Right.
they could have done this or they could have done that. My dad was a writer too. And that's really, he said, when he quit writing, he's like, I just can't deal with it, Jeffrey. I can't keep up with the email and all these. Well, my dad retired after his department required that everybody check their email. He was just like, I don't want to do that. And I'm old enough that I don't have to. So he retired. But yeah, technology, I think for horror writers it can be a boon and it can be a real burden to like, how do I get my characters so they're vulnerable, that they can't just Google this or Google that or whatever. So the island allowed for that too, to have no, and in a believable way that there would be no Wi-Fi or cell service out there.
Or any way off of the island, or immediately off of the island, so to speak. So
right. Yeah, that was all. I had fun coming up with this elaborate, the flags that Caleb uses with his pontoon boat as to whether or not. But I mean, that's their way off the island. Once you meet Caleb as a character, you realize there's no, quick way for them to get off the island. Like it's good. Even if they were in an emergency, it's probably going to be an hour before he gets out there.
exactly. Well, an emergency does arise, but we won't say what.
Okay.
All right. So I want to talk a little bit about that. You said this is your sort of first adventure into horror. So what drew you to the horror space? And I'd love to talk a little bit more about the challenges you sort of experienced while writing in it.
Sure. Yeah, the challenges I can talk about for sure. As far as I don't know. I'll tell you what, I spent the summer of 2020 trying not to write this novel. It was staying with me, and in my head, I had a couple of things working against me. At least I was a literary snob, where I was like, you don't write horror, you write literary, you write boring stories about people who think about existentialism and stare into their navels or whatever. Horror is not your genre. But I was also in my filmmaking, which I came to late, I was trying different genres while I was making these short films. And I made a lot of comedies. I enjoy comedies. I acted in some of them. But I found myself being drawn to horror as a genre in short film first. And I think that's what at least opened the door a little bit to the idea that I didn't fully understand what horror could do or what it could be about. Because I was watching more, especially short horror films, which are very interesting. I don't think they get the eyes on them that, feature films do. People are doing really, I just love going on Vimeo and looking for horror films and go on YouTube. Just people's ideas. It's so fascinating to watch them and be like, I never would have come up with this idea. I wouldn't even have the bravery to attempt to make this because it seems like on its surface it should fail. And yet this filmmaker made it work. That's amazing to me, that people believe in their ideas, that they actually put money in and they make these things, even though when you hear the premise, it's like, that's not going to work. And then it works. They have that passion, that belief in their work. So I think that's what led me to at least think about horror as a possibility. But as I said, I spent that whole summer, I was meeting I have a buddy that I fly fish with up in the Pigeon River Forest in Michigan. And when we weren't fishing, we were sitting around the fire and I'm telling him about this idea that I have for a widower father and the alcoholism and the kids and the paranormal stuff. And it was really kind of cool of him at the end of the summer. He's like, have you started yet? And I was like, no. And he goes, you really have to kind of shut up talking about this book and start writing it. And
Well, I appreciate him.
yeah, it was great. And I started it in September of 2020, and I finished the first draft in November of 2020.
Wow, it's awesome.
Again, that's the pandemic. There were, a number of things going on, but the big thing was we were teaching completely online. So I pretty much spent my day in this very transactional world of waiting for student emails to come in or waiting for discussion posts to appear from students. But there was a lot of downtime too, where I wanted to be receptive to my students. So I felt, and give them kind of quick responses to any questions. So I was on my computer a good part of the day, but not doing anything. So I was having like 2,500, 3,000 word days back to back to back, because I just had so much time on my hands, as a lot of us found ourselves with during the pandemic. But you asked about the struggles. Man, talk about imposter syndrome. Like the whole time, it's like, you're not a horror. It's just this voice in my head. You're not a horror writer. You're gonna write this unmarketable thing that's going to be too literary for the horror world and too horrific for the literary world. And you've just created yourself this kind of personal limbo where your book is going to sit and no one's going to be interested in it. And I'm so pleased to hear that the literary stuff is part of what makes the book work, is the real deep dive into these characters in grief, in alcoholism, in fear of losing your children. So that was great to hear from you, that that's some of what you appreciate about the book is the character development.
1000%. So I want to talk a little bit sort of to that note. Isaac's personal journey, as we've talked about it resonates pretty deeply, I think, not with just me, but a lot of people. So I'm just kind of curious, what are you hoping that people take away from this story?
Well, I mean, on one level, I just hope it's entertaining, engaging. I hope, as I think anybody would when they finish, their first reaction is that was not a waste of time. Like, I don't know fully why it hit me or why it was good or whatnot, but it was not a waste of my time. I don't know. I think I would hope it could be an inspiration to people who are struggling with addiction. That might be a little lofty of a goal for the book, that somebody would read that and find their own kind of strength to quit. I know I found mine, but obviously I was kind of writing about myself as I was writing the character. I think that's the bigger thing I'm kind of dealing with on a more personal level for me, was just, I know what it did for me in terms of being able to find that. And I didn't quit immediately. I mean, it was in April of 2021 that I was finally just done. If I can turn it around, what message as a reader do you take from the book?
Well, actually, I was actually going to just say that I think a lot of us during the pandemic found ourselves being at home, turning to ways to entertain ourselves. I did see myself taking in and consuming a lot more alcohol than I normally would beforehand. And as I was reading through the story, I was seeing a lot of things that I was like, well, damn, I did that. And it was shocking, because it's not something that I sort of stopped to think about. And so it was kind of eye-opening to me that I could sort of see a lot of that as well. But for me, I think the most profound part of it was grief, because, as having lost anybody in this life, have lost people, being able to sort of connect with that grief came through, and it came off the page for me. And it was like learning to, like, reading about it, and the way that it's presented in this story really kind of got its hooks into me. The little lamprey that it is, I guess, if you will. But it did kind of sort of connect with me in a very personal way. And while I personally don't have kids, I was like, wow, what would I do if I had found myself in this position? And sort of it connected back to, I did, during the pandemic, when we found ourselves in a situation that we couldn't control, we leaned more heavily into, alcohol, and that addictive personality did sort of start to come out a little bit. And it started to make me think, if I found myself in a very serious situation, something to be mindful of. So
I think you just made me think of another possible thing I was get is the world. I think if you're a parent, especially, you need to pay attention. The world is more threatening, especially the online world. There's a lot of
Oh my God, yeah.
my kids have gotten into some pickles with interacting with strangers and what you just, and if you're not paying attention, if your escape is booze or something or whatever, even an addiction to, social media yourself, where you're on it too much, or, I think parenthood calls or requires a level of attention to detail with what the kids are doing that he clearly lost with, maybe never had because he didn't have to in the partnership, and then kind of wallowed. Yeah, so another message of the book is I think about, maybe I'm representing those modern kind of quiet threats in the occult and paranormal, so I think that's one of the strengths of, I think, horror is its ability to represent something else too, but that's literature, period. And that's one of the things I've discovered is horror is as literary as anything. I mean, Moby Dick is a horror story. That whale is paranormal. That whale is otherworldly. The Metamorphosis by Kafka is a horror story. The guy wakes up to find himself a giant cockroach. And then you can put all kinds of meaning into that. Why a cockroach? What is Kafka trying to say? Is this just a personal story about how he feared his father and he felt diminished in his presence? Or is it about all of us, that if we allow ourselves to get too involved with work, we can lose ourselves? We can become bug-like, where we are serving the hive and not serving ourselves. And is his turning into a bug just the final process, because really he's been a bug all along? He's never really asked. I'm assuming your listeners have read The Metamorphosis. Maybe I should stop this. But yeah, I think there's a lot of, that's the symbolic potential within horror is, what do my characters, the evil characters, represent? And I think that could be it too, is these threats to your children that, if you're unaware or not paying attention, can become deadly. People's kids get abducted because they weren't paying attention to who they were talking to on the internet. It's a frightening, quiet world that you kind of invite right into your home when your children go upstairs and say, I'm going to go sit on my iPad. And it sounds innocent. It's innocent as saying, I'm going to go up and watch cartoons, except they're not watching cartoons. They're potentially interacting with, 46-year-olds who might have plans for them that, are
the various plans. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think that's some of what I'm after in the story too, is just what we enter into when we agree to bring other people into the world.
All right, my favorite question. Without giving anything away, without spoilers, what is your favorite moment or scene that you feel like readers should look forward to? And before you answer that, I'm going to give you mine. Okay. There are two. I have two. The funniest moment for me, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's Adam that says this. It's the dentist crayfish.
Okay. All right. Okay.
I literally laughed out loud at that moment. So I don't want to spoil what it is, but it literally was one of the funniest moments. It was so funny, I wrote it down. So, and then, but the creepiest moment for me by far is when the family is arriving at the cabin and Isaac picks up Carson, and Carson turns to him and says what he says. I think when they're getting off the boat after Caleb lets them off the boat for the first time. And I was like, oh my God, that would freak me out. So if that happens, so those are my two favorite moments.
That might be the first. There's hints of it early on. I have to hint throughout. And that's what that was something that I struggled with too, is I had a friend read the book, and he's a, kind of a lit guy. And he said, you have a great story here. Why can't you just take out all the paranormal crap? Because he didn't see the need for that. And I had to make sure that was built in and hinted at throughout. But I think the moment you're talking about is the first one where it's like, there's something going on here that is bigger, than these little moments that have happened prior to. I would say, as I'm thinking about it, one of my favorite scenes was to get Isaac out when he was operating the equipment to look for lamprey, that he's worried that sea lamprey, and that's all true. These little inland lakes up near Sheboygan, some sea lamprey have gotten into some of the bigger lakes, Burt Lake, and some others. And even though the lake that Isaac is on is fictional, I have it written in a way like it's connected to this system. So he's already fearful, like, oh, my great fishing cabin, and we have a river right on the little island, is going to be infected by these lamprey. So he brings the equipment with him. It happens to be in his vehicle, and I just liked one, because I was wondering if I was up to the challenge. I had to do a lot of research for that scene. I'm very fortunate that my brother-in-law worked, he's retired, but he worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service doing exactly what Isaac does. So I was able to run a lot of scenes by him and say, like, am I getting this right? So one, just writing that scene, and it might be interesting for your listeners to, like, I don't know, I like these, that you learn something from a book too.
Mm-hmm.
And so to learn this process, because I can tell you this, what I wrote about that lamprey equipment is true. Like, I did a lot of research, so I'm very excited that it is authentic. But then what happens afterwards, shortly afterwards, with the ravens and the dead fish that he sees floating down the river, and his constant, I mean, he's so skeptical through the whole book. He is not a true believer at all in anything paranormal. So he's always justifying, things he sees. He's like, I must be hallucinating because I'm trying to quit the booze. Like, he will never attribute it to something else. And I think that describes a lot of people too. I think, a lot of people think it's all bunk. So I do like that scene. And another reason I liked it, I like fly fishing, and I like writing about it, but I'm not going to write a river runs through it. I don't want to write a whole book about it, but I do love the scenes when he does get out fishing, because it allows me to fish out of season. I can just fish in my imagination on the page.
I love the way you say that, and I can tell you love that because the character loved it, and the amount of time that you dedicated to sort of explaining and going through the steps to get there really showed and came through. So I could see the love and appreciation for it in the words, for sure. So you actually, Van, sort of answered my question at the very top of the conversation. I wanted to ask if there was a sequel to this book, because you certainly sort of set it up so that there could be, and I'm thrilled to know that there is. So I'm excited for that. What's that time? Do you know that timeline yet? Sort of. I know you've talked a little bit about it already.
Well, the book, and they're out in California too. The book came out from Montag Press. They're kind of a collective, small indie press. They put out a dystopian novel of mine called Rules of Order in I wrote that 2020. That came out in 2022. This one came out in 2024. And so I just kind of reached out to them, say, do you also do horror? And that's how that came about, that they said, yeah, we'll take a look at this other manuscript of yours. And they've been great to work with. I have not reached out. I've hinted to them in emails that I'm working on a sequel. I have not reached out yet fully to say, would you guys want to see it when I'm done with it? I think I would like to approach them again, but I don't necessarily know. So to put a timeline on when it will be out, I have no idea, because I don't self-publish, partly because I'm in academia and for promotion purposes and whatnot. You can't really put something on your promotion packet that's like, oh, who published it? I did, because I think it's really good.
I think it's great.
Yeah, it's like, well, of course you do. But as far as the writing of it, when I get off of talking to you, I actually have it open on my computer here, and I will hit page 150 today.
That's awesome.
And my plan is to have a draft done by the end of the semester. So the end of April, I'll have a complete draft. Then I can start the real joy of the rewriting, which I really do enjoy. And so I think it will be ready to at least send to the Montag or some editor to look at by the end of the summer. But
That's awesome. I'm
you know how
excited.
publishing works. You can be done, and it can still be 2 years before it comes
Exactly.
out. Yeah.
Well, I will definitely keep my eyes peeled for it because, like I said, I'm already a fan. So I'm definitely looking forward to the sequel. This book I thought was really, really great. And so on that note, well, I'm going to let you tell our audiences where they can find the Dance of Rotten Sticks and also where they can find you.
Well, they can find I mean, is obviously it's ubiquitous. Amazon.com is the best place to go. It's very reasonable, and I think this is what's gotten some readers off of Bluesky to take a chance on it, because I'm an unknown commodity. It's $2.99 on the Kindle, and it's done quite well on the Kindle, but some paperback versions have sold too, as I see you holding one. But yeah,
I bought a
Amazon.com.
couple for friends too. So
What's that?
I did buy a couple for friends as well. I was like, you have to read this. So
That's awesome. Thank you. And then you would look that up under JC Vande Zande. But if you looked up just Vande Zande, it's a goofy last name. It's been really hard on my son Randy. No, I'm just kidding. We didn't know
Randy Vande Zande. I love it.
Yes.
I mean, I would kind of kill for that name. So.
If somebody wanted to look me up, I got to look here. I am at jeffvandezande.bluesky. I'm having trouble.
Social, I think it is, right? I'll put all this stuff in the show notes, and I'll also on the video version it'll be on screen as well. So,
but that tends to be the only place I really hang out. I have a Twitter account at JC Vandez, and I'm not on there very much. Bluesky, I'm enjoying very much. For your listeners, this is a plug. Get on Bluesky.
That's how we met. So
yes, absolutely. Yeah. And Rick and I were talking about how it feels like Twitter in the early days, the true community days, not the adversarial, let's hack each other's heads off days that we seem to be in now.
Exactly. So, well, Van, I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. And thank you for talking to me. The book, again, is The Dance of Rotten Sticks. Again, all that information I'll put in the show notes. I'll put on screen for the video version. And thanks for joining me on another episode of Quills and Chills. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the mysterious and the haunted. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to support us by subscribing on your preferred podcast platform and leaving us a rating or review, because your feedback helps keep those chills running down both our spines. And feel free to share the show with your favorite fellow horror enthusiasts. Also, if you guys have any spooky stories, strange encounters, or paranormal experiences of your own, I'd love to hear them. Reach out to me on social media or email me at quillsandchillspodcast@gmail.com. Who knows? Your story might end up on a very special episode. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I will see you back here next time on Quills and Chills. Bye, y'all.